translator for, yeah, I've got
brilliant mind, yeah.
Exactly. And he's got some linguistic evidence that that is indeed the case, that they were very temporally close to each other, but they're separate groups. Okay, so now the insects think that this planet is theirs, that we are, everything on this planet belongs to the insects, and they're free to do anything they want with us. And the insects may know that the Anunnaki screwed with us, and they may not care, because in the longer scheme of things, in their 2,000 and 3,000 year programs, their little 500 or 600 year thing is just a blip, and they just don't care what they're doing. We're going to be isolated and die out anyway. So why should the insects involve themselves? I don't think that the insects are in particular at war with the Anunnaki or the Elohim or any of these guys. I don't know how they really react with them, but I do think that the insects are following along behind the Nemo, because they've discovered that the Nemo are creating, through their own mechanisms, beings like ourselves that can be considered to be soul containers, okay, that have this ability for reincarnation, for personal existential or experiential growth over different lifetimes, etc. There's a whole lot we can go into there that is would just be diverting at the moment. But I think that the insects, they in their own minds think that they're better than the Nemo. So there may be a level of competition. Okay, I wouldn't want to say contention, but competition with the Nemo. But the insects are doing things quite oddly in my viewpoint. All right. And this is actually one of the keys that threw me into the fact that this is real, that it's not a giant structured LARP out of entertainment Hollywood. Okay, I know that this is the case because not only the giant absence of everybody talking about abductions 4 times a day, because that's how many are going on, that, you know, it's like if there were 5 million car wrecks every day, you'd constantly be talking about car wrecks. You know, you'd have 5 car wrecks you'd seen just walking down the street to get your mail, that kind of thing, right? And so you'd talk about it all the time. We just don't see that relative to the number of abductions that are going on. And I also know that the language about the abductions is expressing to us that the insect view of things is running in a secondary mode to something. And I believe that to be the Nemo. And so I think that what the insects are attempting to do is to build these souled containers for their own purpose. And this is where we keep running into a big hard wall. We don't know why they're doing a lot of these things. It was this aspect of it, getting back to that. Okay, if you read Jacob's book, you find out that there's a lot of language in there that is 100% not like channeling. There's a lot of language in there that's 100% not like blue avian space cult kind of things. So let me give you a few examples, okay? So blue avian space cult guy says he gets abducted by aliens and he's in a big blue sphere, and they take him up to a ship that's like hard and solid and stuff, and he sits in a seat and they give him a laptop, okay? Nothing that the blue avian guy ever describes is unusual to humans. All right, it's normal average stuff. Bielik, the guy from the Philadelphia experiment, supposedly goes thousands of years into the future and sees what? Mainframes. Nobody's got cell phones, but he sees mainframes in every city. Well, both of these individuals are placing their own mental images within that delusion, right? This is not the case with Jacob's material. These abductees continually report stuff that makes no sense, that is so weird from a human perspective that it seems creepy alien, okay? Because these aliens don't understand so much. And the idea of nuance, for instance, is not understood. The idea of music is not understood. They don't have music and all of this kind of stuff. Yet you notice in all these other fantasy approaches, it's basically human stuff magnified. Okay, there's people in the, you know, like in the Star Wars thing, there's a bar and there's musicians. Well, that's from a human perspective. We have ears. Well, how about all the species that don't have ears that would show up there, and music is meaningless to them, right? They would have to have it explained to them. Well, what are those guys doing? And blah, 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 right? Exactly. And this is what happened in these books by Jacob and these Spanish researchers. There's a lot written in the Spanish language. There's a lot written in Filipino message boards about this subject, and the language is always the same. You've got to explain music to them, and in excruciating detail that drives you crazy because they don't understand the idea of percussion versus a string. They don't understand scale or any of this. And even after you tell them, they don't grasp it because they don't have the emotional response to it, because they don't have the vagus nervous system that is actually like a hormonal antenna that goes twang, twang, twang when that music flows through you. It's your hormonal antenna that causes those hairs to rise up on your body. And it's causing that because there's a conflict within your mind as you go towards that subject. And your vagus nervous system is your protectant against doing dumbass things and getting yourself killed, assuming that we were in a natural environment, which we may never have been if we were artificially created, right? So it gets really deep from this point on. So other questions?
Well, that sounds like the universe keeping things in order, not letting one being get so powerful. So, okay, you get emotions, you get these opportunities. You have no emotions, you don't get these opportunities, but other things will present themselves. It's all just chaos, order, and chaos. It's fantastic.
It's always a challenge. Okay, emotions are a curse and a blessing. A challenge.
Yeah, you could, to say the least, absolutely a challenge. Let me ask one more question from my standpoint. Then we're going to take questions from the audience here. And this is this is an awesome crowd. We've got over 3,300 people, almost 3,400 people watching this live, and it's just continuing to grow.
I bet you it's probably close to 3 times that. One of the algos is used to dampen down woo-woo subject guys. You'll see some of these things where they have 1,600 people on the show. Yours frequently follows this, and the instant you're off and it clicks over into the processing in YouTube, that'll shoot up to 6,000 when it had been 1,600 literally 2 seconds before.
Huh. Well, regardless, this is amazing. Still super amazing numbers, and that just takes it over the top. But you were talking about some of these experiences that people have had when they've been in altered states, and I remember I go back to like 2011 when I wanted to have like a shamanic experience, and there's this stuff called salvia divorium or something similar to that, and it's totally legal. I mean, you can just go to the store and buy it. And I heard somebody talk about their experience. I'm like, I want to see if I can have an out of body experience with this. So I did it 2 times, and actually I did it 3 or 4 times, but 2 times specifically, I remember being so scary and so far out that they were like the scariest things that have ever happened to me. The first time I remember I was laying on the ground by myself, and then all of a sudden, after I did it, and it only lasted for a minute as far as not being able to move, but I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. Time, I felt like it was forever. And then all of a sudden, as I'm laying down in a dark room, I noticed that like I'm around all these other people. And then we're all like connected in this way. And then like I said, if you've ever seen the original Total Recall, where
Sure,
Arnold Schwarzenegger is trying to get through customs, so he's dressed
right with that head. Yeah.
And then the head comes off, it's all
yep.
Well, okay, so I remember when I'm in this thing and I'm down here and I felt like I was in hell. I felt like I was actually inside of the earth, not having an out of body. It was like inner body. And then I'm connected to all these other people. And then there's like this one being that I guess the best way to describe it is I felt like I was Archon food. And this huge being, this huge thing was like the master of everything. And I remember the only time I could move for this first minute or so was when I was allowed to. And I wasn't even really moving in real life. I was just moving in my mind. And I felt like I was in a giant stadium. And when everybody can do the wave, like you're waiting to do the wave, and then it's your turn. You're like, okay, so that's what it was like. I was at this giant stadium, and then all of a sudden, when it was my turn to move, then I could. But I felt like I was in this perpetual. I was stuck in time, and I was never going to be able to get out. And I mean, it was like, let me out. It was like that. So what the hell was it, man? Was it an alien? Was I in hell? Was it my mind? Swamp gas?
No, except for swamp gas, I would say it was all 3. There was an alien, you were in hell, and it was in your mind. Okay. Now, here's something to say that there's what are known as the 7 different herbal teachers, okay, that includes loco weed or divinorum, salvia divinorum, okay? But not every psychedelic plant is used for every purpose by shaman. And here's something else. If you don't have the twisted genetics in you, you can never have a shamanic journey, no matter how many psychedelics you take. And I'm sorry to tell you that. It is not an even playing field. I'm quite convinced of this. Plus, if you are an abductee and have had a history of being in an abductions, probably not wise to take psychedelics, because it means that you have a genetic predisposition. Being an abductee, you have a genetic predisposition for being able to be under their control, in particular neural pathway way. Now, it's possible that the taking of psychedelics might break that they may not be able to abduct you effectively thereafter. That may be a weapon we might be able to use, but it's never going to be pleasant for anybody that has those neural pathways. As an instance, okay, when I take psychedelics, because I have schizophrenic genes that are active in my body, I have an entirely different experience with psychedelics than, let's say, 80 to 90% of those people that take them. I have what is a shamanic level of experience with even little tiny doses. Okay, I don't have to take 20 grams of shrooms, and the effect of taking 20 grams versus 5 versus 1/5 is moderated by distance and time, not by nature. So I have the same level of shamanic experience with each and every one of these. And it has to do with my genetic expression. Okay, and so this is something you cannot control. But it is my understanding that appropriate use of psychedelics for abductees may be a weapon that we can employ in the future to disrupt these cycles. Okay, for instance, it might be feasible that if we all organized ourselves and we all had guides and we had people that had been through it shamanically, like myself, repeatedly, and we put all this effort into it, that we could get 1 million abductees together, get them all to ride a particular emotional psychedelic shock wave, and then they would be done with the abductions, because it would have so altered the neural pathways in their brains that those beings could not get at them in the future in the way in which they do now. We know, for instance, that the appropriate use of psychedelics can cause extremely long-term changes in your neural pathways with a single exposure. So they can give, under guided conditions, they can give people with PSTD psychedelics, or alcoholics psychedelics, and change that behavior for well over a year with one exposure. Now, some drugs like loco weed are not going to be that particular. That's like a weird kind of DMT. You do actually go down into internal things with loco weed. It's known as the underground one, right? It doesn't lift you out into space. It's one of these that drives you down into the roots. And then one of the problems with, from a shamanic viewpoint, with Salvia divinorum, is that you can get trapped by the roots, is the expression. Okay, because you end up getting trapped in the roots, and people say that they can die there emotionally, and it's very terrible, and so on. So you have to understand what these drugs are used for, how they're used. It's a technology. It may be useful to us. I don't know. I can't say. We need to perform experiments and to see what happens, right? Get a willing abductee and structure an experiment that makes sense relative to their abduction patterns, validate all of this and so on. And then, figure out which psychedelic for their body type and their conditions, and then guide them through, and then see if they get abducted again in the future. There's interesting things.
Science.
Well, in the name of fighting off an invasion force, because bear in mind, in our particular LARP here, in this fantasy that we're constructing for YouTube, we're being invaded right now. There's new hybrids being placed into our society right now that are fumbling and bumbling around for some purpose that they're not even aware of. They simply follow orders, because in a telepathic society, your mind is not your own. Whoever is on the ultimate chain of command in this hierarchy is controlling it all. And that turns out to be these insect beings who are not like us. And they're a pain in the ass to everybody. I've talked to this one guy when I was on mescaline. And this guy I talked to a couple of times at this particular space. And this being was hominid, but they didn't have language as we understand it. They were also telepathic, but they were telepathic through their vagus nervous system, which produced a shimmering biophotons that left their skin to show what their emotions were. And that's how they communicated, and that's how they talked among themselves, was that they would send signal. They would just feel something and it would come on out, and they could have complex patterns all over their skin with this stuff. And it was like us talking in words, only exactly. So only it wasn't audible. It was visual. And these guys, that guy, whatever the hell that species was called, which was way off. I mean, it was way off. Not local fellows at all. And they had problems with the bugs. And they have a real problem with the bugs because they were very telepathic when they first encountered the bugs, and the bugs tried to do their field control neuropathy kind of thing. So the bugs show up and they assume they're the top dog. They assume they're going to be able to dominate everybody. They're attracted by high psychic planets like ours. Because we're just exuding psychic energy. And in their experience, that exusion of psychic energy means minds that are not controlled enough. And so they can tap right in and work their way, right? So I think we have to, as humans, we got to get crafty. We've got to be sneaky about this. Our military, I think, is desperately involved with this. Only it's not a war where we've got, F-15s trying to shoot down UFOs in the skies like Independence Day. Okay, it's not that kind of war. It's a war of them tracking abductees. It's a war of them compiling vast amounts of information on who's doing what, where, and why, so that they can infer what these aliens are doing. It makes so much sense of the giant data modeling that's going on and the giant data mining that's going on minute activities that don't make any sense as to why the government should care about a lot of this stuff, right? But as soon as you pop into this one little thing, oh, well, we're in the midst of an alien invasion. Yeah, it then helps to know who's buying what in quantity and how they're paying for it and where the flow of goods is going and all of these kind of things. Because in that example I gave you earlier of the apartment building in Germany, where the guy owned the apartment building and he was stuck with the water bill and he was stuck with that sewer bill because it wasn't paid those 3 months, even though they told him they would be responsible for the utilities. Then they wrote him out a check and all of that. It was just fantasy. They never actually had any money put into the system, yet goods went there and resources went there and they were consumed and taken away. So if we have deficits in our accounts matching up, then you can track things by those deficits. Where is material disappearing? What kind of material is it? And some of the strange stuff that's going on. So see, all of this kind of stuff are weapons within our human battle against these aliens, because these people, the military, our US military, the Chinese, the Russians, to a certain extent, the British, to a certain extent, the Australians, to a huge extent, the military in Malaysia and Indonesia, these guys are very much involved in this war against these invading space aliens. But they can't go and round people up, for instance, that they suspect are hybrids, because we don't know what the space aliens will do. And we need to know what they're doing and what their plan is before we try and disrupt it, because we cannot shoot them out of the sky. We don't have that level of power at this stage. They have some level of technology that we can't even guess at. So one of the things is they form the characteristics of their spaceships with their mind. Yet the spaceship is solid. It's nuts and bolts in a sense, right? It may be little tiny particles that are all linked together that simply respond to the thought waves that these guys give them, and it'll form a chair right out of the wall for you. These kind of deals, right? So actually, these sorts of elements told to us by abductees, when we place it within the context of the questions that the hybrids ask, it makes a lot of sense. So the hybrids are curious about the clutter. They're curious about all the cables in your room. Okay, what are those cables for? What do they do? How are they made? Why is it necessary? Why does that machine have to have a cable to get electricity? Why does it have to have a cable to get to a connection to go online? Because they don't have that in the spaceships, because the spaceship itself, to some degree, participates in supplying all of these needs. So there is no need for a cable. If you needed, for instance, to charge your phone, you just stick it on the wall or set it on the floor or whatever, and the ship would charge it for you. That kind of a thing, right?
That's fascinating, and it makes sense. And it makes me think that that's another reason maybe they are looking for stuff in these DNA kits. Used to be $100. Now they're even offering a special right now, $49.95. Send in your DNA and they'll tell you exactly where you come from. Imagine getting a knock on the door. Clif, open the door.
No, it's
We've
not
got your
working that
DNA.
way though. They know all about us though. See, but see,
Right.
I'm a military brat, so they probably have got me scoped out so many ways. All of us were used for all different kinds of experiments that I now think are part of this. And actually, if you were really to ask me, Cliff, what do you think the secret societies come from?